All right, let's bring you some other developing news now. And this is a story we've been building up to for some weeks. Today is the deadline for ending pit latrines in schools, as set by Basic Education Minister Siviwe Gwarube in March last year. Now, earlier this month, Gwarube told Parliament that the department had reached a 93% completion rate in eradicating pit latrines based on the 2018 Safe Initiative audit. That initiative was launched to eliminate unsafe toilets in schools after 5-year-old Michael Komape drowned in a pit toilet at his school in Limpopo. Now, a 2021 High Court ruling ordered the Department of Education in the province to provide plans to eradicate pit toilets from the school's provinces. Let's unpack the story with Equal Education's Noncedo Madubedube. It's great to talk to you, Noncedo. She's the General Secretary of Equal Education. And here we are. It is March 31st. We should have 0 pit latrines in our toilets, in our schools as of today.
Thank you so much for having us. I think 3 big things stick out for me today. The first is that I'm hoping that ordinary South Africans, especially those of us that are interestingly watching the government of national unity, now understand what we mean when we talk about participatory democracy, and the need for ordinary people like you and I, for everyone that's watching, members of not just schools, but school communities really need to band together for public accountability, to demand transparency from government and some sense of urgency around fulfilling the very basic rights, especially those of children in South Africa. The minister made a very careless declaration at the end of last year. It could have been end of last year or beginning of this year, touting that they would have fully eradicated plain pit latrines by the 31st of March. And that simply was an unrealistic thing to put out and declare from the get-go. That's the first thing. The reason we know that for sure is that on the other side of many declarations that have been made by provincial education departments, the DBE itself, even pre the current minister, by different presentations from DGs and portfolio committees over the last 10 years, we've seen the same declarations being made, the same promises being made to children and the schooling community. And they always tout the same reasons for not achieving those deadlines. I mean, we were talking to Chapter 9 institutions at least 2 months ago, who are already saying to us from what they've seen on the ground, and this is outside the work that we do as social justice organizations. The South African Human Rights Commission went on school visits across the country, came back from those and said, look, it's unlikely that this deadline is going to be met. What is the minister talking about? And they tout the same reasons. So they'll say to us, look, it's a capacity constraint issue. The departments are undercapacitated. They'll say they're having challenges with implementing agents and contractors. While they say that, to date, the Department of Basic Education nationally and provincially has not blacklisted a single implementing agent. So now, if you're calling this a political priority and you budget towards it, what does it mean for the department not to have, over so many years, a consequence management process or system that's open to general public as well, that they're using inside of their own structures to make sure that when money and projects are administered and run through the tender and supply chain processes, that those schools actually get built, those sanitation facilities actually get built in real time. The other things they normally tout are things around budget constraints. Now, if anyone here has listened to Equal Education speak, in particular, those of us that are based in rural provinces, you'll hear the story that money sometimes goes back to National Treasury at the end of a financial year. You'll also know that in the last financial period, the Department of Basic Education had 2.4 billion rand of fruitless and wasteful expenditure. So how is it that there is no money to do the very basic here of fulfilling a law for safety and dignity and school infrastructure inside schools in South Africa in real terms? And while we're watching these budget constraints, the fruitless expenditure happen and money being taken back to National Treasury at the end of financial periods, we're also noting something called an Education Infrastructure Grant, the IEG. In the medium term, that grant is actually losing money. And so while we've got a sanitation crisis in our schools, the budget is decreasing for those funds to be met. There is no consequence management system or process. The only thing we're hearing are more slogans, more rhetoric, and more careless promises made to ordinary South Africans. And I'm really appealing to everyone that is watching today to please band with us. Find us on all of our social media platforms, call us after this segment, and let's join hands in doing something in real term to make sure that the Department of Basic Education, the state, and this is the responsibility of the state. So I'm not asking people to go and hand out shoes or build the toilets themselves. Let's band together and put together a system that helps build the capacity of state to fulfill its right of basic education for children. And the reason I'm making this call is because what we're finding isn't just learning losses, those that can't be in the types of schools that are unsafe in terms of sanitation facilities, but we're also seeing what we're calling toilet losses. So because the department is struggling to build and capacitate schools with basic sanitation, it is then also struggling to maintain sanitation. So the urban provinces that EE organizes in are also wanting to build strong sanitation campaigns because they too are having the same problems, even if they don't have only plain pit latrines and they've got a combination of maybe flush toilets and plain pits or just flush toilets, but the maintenance is atrocious in our schools. And this affects both learners and teachers and school staff. And so what we're saying is that the Department of Basic Education needs to also put together a really robust maintenance plan for sanitation facilities across all schools. It is a matter of national urgency. And
it is a matter of life or death. We
100%.
know that since Michael Komape and many other cases since Michael Komape. And, you know, we say these things as descriptors. He drowned in a pit toilet. But the horror that's involved in a little child falling into a pit latrine and drowning, I think all of us need to take a moment to just think of that and to think of our own children. It is a shame on our democracy that our children are still losing their lives in pit toilets and that there are still empty promises being made, one administration after another. Noncedo, so as we continue to reflect on the story, perhaps let's talk about why it has taken us this long. And might one of the reasons be that we don't have an up-to-the-minute audit on how many pit toilets we have in the country? As far as I can see, the last audit was done in 2018, so 7 years ago.
Now, I want to introduce something that I'm hoping people watching that are living in South Africa will remember and go try and find. There was a norms and standards for school infrastructure that was promulgated in 2013. It started during the era of Naledi Pandor. Equal Education and various other social justice organizations have fought hard back and forth inside litigation processes too, to compel government and the Department of Education to put together a basic law that says in order for a school to be called a public school, what are the things that it needs to have? And the reason that it was important is because inside the democratic South Africa, we didn't have such a law that said, look, if a school doesn't have, never mind the library, a working toilet, whether it's a VIP ventilated or plain pit latrine or flushing toilet and or running water, electrical security inside those schools. And those schools shouldn't be called schools unless the public education system was able to get them those resources and those capacities. And so it helped us identify what schools then became priorities in terms of needing to be fixed in immediate terms. Those are the mud schools, inappropriate infrastructures, and so forth. What happened last year, I think on the eve of the elections, on the 28th of May, the Department of Basic Education snuck through an amendment to the norms and standards for school infrastructure. And when we caught this amended law, we found that the Department of Education had removed timelines, legally binding timelines in this law that was compelling the department to fix different elements of schools over different periods. So for example, in the previously gazetted norms and standards for school infrastructure, by 2016, the 29th of November, we should have seen a full eradication of all plain pit latrines in schools and all schools being provided with water. Now it's 2025 and ministers are still making careless declarations. But what the point we're trying to make to the Department of Education is that you need to reinstill some timelines back into that law. Because at the moment it says things like the department will commit to putting together a report with some kind of review of the numbers of toilets needed within 12 months of the beginning of a financial year. It's too vague and opaque for a department and a government that struggles with public accountability or full implementation of a basic human right.
Yeah. The other issue, sorry to interrupt you there, Noncedo, but the other issue is in so many cases, schools might not be using pit toilets, but they are using unhygienic mobile toilets. There aren't enough toilets for all of the learners, and the learners suffer because the toilets aren't cleaned regularly.
The other crisis which is associated to that kind of maintenance of toilets and sanitation facilities is that the departments of education, both national and provincially, and we found this out the hard way, unfortunately, truly struggle with data. And if you don't have accurate data, or you cook numbers, or you keep sharing the same numbers over the last 3 years as though nothing's happening on the ground, it means that you aren't able to plan appropriately. And that's why we see so much money being lost in the system, because department officials are plowing money into communities, resources, regions, and areas where there likely probably isn't a need for that kind of intervention. What happened in the Department of Basic Education in Limpopo was that the litigation strategy, so there was a court case that was put through to the High Court by Section 27, and Equal Education and the Equal Education Law Center joined as friends of the court. That court case made a court order and a judgment and verdict that asked the Department of Limpopo Education to go back and do a thorough audit and review of how many schools were, and then order them by list of priorities. Now, in a functioning state and government, we shouldn't need a court order to get that kind of insight. The Department of Education nationally has been, for at least the last 7 years, promising ordinary South Africans that it's going to work on a public information systems that shows where the site is, how far the construction is going, who's the contractor, who's the implementing agent, when is it likely to be finished. Now we don't have access to that information. Equal Education has been calling for a long time for making public what we are calling an EFMS. It's an infrastructure framework system that should be public. And the reason for that is that outside of the DG and the minister putting on construction hats at different random schools across the country and writing really lovely tweets, we want to be able to see in real terms where the schools are affected, what are their priorities, so we can help them build a strong database of where, when, and by whom. And so I'm asking people watching now to be helping us call for timelines back in the law for school infrastructure. We need some kind of accountability lever. Ordinary community members need something to say, by this date, this is meant to have been completed. We need public records of which schools, where, and what their needs are in relation to school infrastructure and sanitation in particular. And the very last is that we really do need the National Treasury and ordinary South Africans like you and I to help make sure that departments of education use their finances effectively and efficiently. We don't need another safe intervention. We need the money that's already in the system to be used well, and for implementing agents that aren't doing their job to be blacklisted now.
Absolutely. The test is always whether, as a minister or as a public servant, whether I would send my child to a school with a pit toilet. And I can tell you that the answer would likely be a resounding no. Noncedo, let me thank you for your time this afternoon. Noncedo Madubedube is the General Secretary for Equal Education. It is the 31st of March. The deadline for pit toilets to be eradicated in the country. The 11th of March was when the Basic Education Minister made an announcement that 93% of pit toilets had been eradicated. But of course, there are questions around those figures. 93% of pit toilets, but sometimes the alternatives, like those mobile toilets, are not much better either. They are unhygienic and they are not serviced on a regular basis. Daytime Update has reached out to the Basic Education Minister, Siviwe Gwarube. We've also reached out to the Limpopo Education Department, and we've received no response or acknowledgement of our requests. So we continue to wait for the Minister to avail herself for this interview.